What's the deepest, darkest secret you know that isn't your own? Vanilla Rice is the father of one of my cousins. He was on tour in the area and apparently my aunt had a thing with him after a gig. My cousin looks just like a female version of him and nothing like her sisters. Nobody mentions why she looks different, and I only found out because my mum told me when she was drunk at a family party years ago. There's a cave that goes under my neighbor's property. It's really beautiful and he wants to keep it to himself. It cuts very far down into the earth and I could barely see a thing when I explored it. Obligatory edit. Wow. This blew up. Unfortunately. Because the cave was structurally and fictionally fragile. It collapsed from the explosion. Wow, you took that deepest, darkest thing literally, didn't you? A girl I used to be friends with confided in me once that she had been raped by a group of seniors at her high school when she was a sophomore. She never reported it and didn't even speak of it to anyone else till years later. Normally that would be really dark by itself. But it doesn't end there. We were drinking one night a few months after she told me about what had happened and she elaborated. She was relatively sexually inexperienced when it happened and she claimed it fundamentally ducked her up in the head. It became a fetish for her. She said she was filled with shame and fear, but that the thought of it happening again turned her on more than anything else ever had. She told me that she first tried to recreate the scenario in her last year of undergrad by convincing a few fraternity guys to gangbang her after a party. They were game. And she said she enjoyed it, but it wasn't the same. She craved the real deal. Something I don't pretend to even begin to understand. But to each their own. Her explanation of her ideal peak sexual scenario basically entailed an actual rapist group of rapists raping her without knowing that she was actually willing. I haven't talked to her in a couple years. We lost touch when I moved out of state. Facebook says she's in a relationship and I truly hope she finds happiness. A woman I knew only married her boyfriend just so her ailing mother could see her married before she died. Then she got pregnant by the dude's best friend and divorced the poor lad to be with his best friend. Straight out of a soap opera. I still feel for the dude and it's been 6 years. I'm assuming the guy she married didn't know why she married him. That's just cruel to mess with someone like that. He thought she loved him and that he was happy and lucky. He never saw it coming. Sadly, no one in our friend circle did. A good friend of mine acts tough and stereotypically manly all the time. Prides himself on drinking whiskey all the time. Only wears boots. He wore work boots to our duck in prom. Goes hunting. That sort of thing. He has no idea I know he used to do ducking ballet. Edit. I think I offended a couple of people, which was not my intention. It's cool with me if guys to do ballet. I'm just saying that the way he acts and who he is as a guy. He'd be mortified if I knew he did ballet. Like if me or one of his friends picked up ballet, he'd take the piss out of us for it. When I was a kid I had a best friend named Jeff and I would hang out at his trailer almost every day and sleep over 3 or 4 nights a week. Every night I slept there we would play Mega Man on Nintendo late into the night until we passed out. After I was asleep, I was always woken up by an incredible pain that would make me cry. His mother used a skillet and grease to get a nickel red hot and then drop it on my back when I was sleeping, burning the ever-loving shit out of me. She said that if I ever told anyone she was a sadist that she would burn down my house, and I truly believe she would have. Why did I keep going every week? Because I fucking loved Mega Man and we couldn't afford a Nintendo. A friend of mine has a daughter. His wife doesn't know. My dad and mom had me on prom night. Obvious accident. He was 15, she was 17. By the time I was born they were both a year older and almost broken up. They seriously considered aborting me but ended up waiting too long anyways. They don't know I know. I mean, I don't care. It was 20 years ago and I know they love me and don't regret ruining their teenage life because of my existence in the least bit. Edit. I have several pictures that I took of pictures. Sorry, on my phone. If anyone want to see them just say so. I don't wanna randomly post picture of my wrinkly incubated baby self without provocation. My granddad was recently buried, but before that my mum told me that he sexually abused her when she was younger. She told her nan who beat her for lying. Apparently he also abused my older sister, but she doesn't recall this and it's nothing we can talk about. I don't want to be rude, but I would like to get advice and know your opinion. Would you recommend that parents tell those things to their children? I mean, would you in retrospect rather not know, or are you okay that your mom shared it with you? Did it change how you see her in any way? Two of my good friends, one guy and one girl, were both repeatedly raped as children by the pastors of their churches. Same state, different churches. The girl's pastor was her father. No one else knows. A former co-worker I'd known for about half an hour told me about an inoperable tumor on her spine that keeps her in constant pain, so she's always doped up on pain meds. It also causes incontinence, so she wets the bed almost every night. I was born with one of those faces that says, "Please tell me something incredibly personal I have no idea how to appropriately respond to." It's an uncomfortable honor. I suppose this isn't dark for most people, but it would be for my ex, who is a Muslim. He has a son. We parted in an extremely ugly way. I had been helping him financially since he didn't have much money when we were studying at the university. He was emotionally abusive and I didn't know any better. After many wrong turns, I found out about 3 months after having my son that he had tried to sleep with my best friend. This from a man who regularly accused me of cheating and constantly made me uncomfortable about dressing the way I wanted. So, we broke off after an extremely ugly talk where I told him almost everything I thought about him that I held back because of his stress from his financial issues. He's now in an Islamic nation. He's living life like has no ties, no son, no past. He's probably going to marry some poor young Muslim woman who he will treat like crap and lie to every day. I'd say my son and I are his dark secret. Edit. A very few of you are asking what my ex being Muslim has to do with him being a jerk. I mentioned his religion more to indicate how big a deal this is as a secret. Some dude goes into this bunker thing under my house every now and then. He thinks we don't know, but I hear him climbing over the fence early in the morning. Is this a reference? I'm pretty sure this is a reference. Yeah? In another thread. I think it was one of these secret threads, some commenter said he built a little bunker on his property then sold the house, but still lives in the bunker, unbeknownst to the new owners. An old friend of mine was a real floozy in high school. She had more than her fair share of abortions. One abortion in particular came with a pretty crazy story. She was with one guy. We'll call him K. And then she started cheating on him with this other guy. We'll call him F. So, about 2 weeks into cheating on K, she finds out she is about 9 weeks pregnant with K's baby. She really liked F. His family has a lot of money, so she told him that the baby was his. F was in college, and he really didn't want a baby. He didn't know that my friend had a history of abortions, and was likely going to do it again. She definitely wanted to keep F, and considering this wasn't his baby, she was bound to get an abortion this time for sure. He didn't know this, so he begged her to get an abortion. She played along, acting as if she wasn't sure. Finally, he made her a deal. If she gets an abortion now, he will marry her after college and have a baby then. Of course, there was more to the relationship. He must have really liked her to make that promise. She had the abortion and broke up with K. So, fast forward 10 years and she and F are married. As it turns out, they can't have kids. She miscarried a few times, but now she can't even get pregnant. Only her and I know that her entire marriage is based on a lie she told her husband 10 years ago about being pregnant with a baby that was never his. And to throw extra salt on the wound, he now thinks that may have been his only chance to be a father. One of my best friends cheated on her husband, got pregnant, got divorced, moved to Arizona, live in MN, had the baby, gave it up for adoption. No one knew for a long time. I still don't think her ex-husband knows. The guy who got her pregnant found out and has spent years trying to get in contact with his daughter and has attempted to get custody. All the while, my friend has had contact as it was an open adoption. The family sends my friend birthday cards, flowers, and pictures. That my parents were actually smoking crack with baby sister in the bedroom when she started having a seizure. I was only 6 or 7 and at a neighbor's house at the time and thought my sister was just having a weird medical emergency. She was fine and recovered, but it wasn't until years later that my dad confided with me about this during one of his severe bout of depression. My buddy's brother got a DUI and his license taken. His brother proceeded to hide it from his wife for 2 weeks. They went on a family vacation. A situation came up where he needed a license. And everything melted down. He was drunk, tried to throw himself overboard, and ended up in the ship's jail. His wife left with the kids. My buddy has been driving his brother around for 2 months because an expensive part on his car went and he doesn't have the extra dollar sign to fix it right now. The local Tea Party candidate dropped out of school after the 8th grade. Spent his entire adult life hosing out septic tanks to support his drug habit. And he has at least 3 bastard children around the state his wife doesn't know about. He's only running for office because his psychotic wife is making him. God help us if he ever gets elected. I know that my first cousin is my sister. None of the parents or my cousin's sister know that I know. My father got my mother's sister pregnant. Tell your dad that you got you're in a relationship with your cousin. Tell him that she's pregnant. Tell him that you want to marry her. And you'd want him to be the best man. Watch him sweat. One of my dearest friends was forced to give her babysitter a BJ when she was younger. 7 or 8 I think. It messed her up quite a bit. She's super Catholic, as she felt it was a terrible sin. I was the first person she told, and that was during her sophomore year of high school. She's happily in a relationship now and shared her first, willing, kiss with the lucky guy. This will probably get buried, but here goes. When I was in 5th and 6th grade I was best friends with a girl whose high school aged brother was in a local gang. One night her brother threw a party and one of his friends ended up having sex with my friend. I wasn't there, but she told me all about it the next day. He came into her room and he was completely wasted and they did the deed. Weeks later, my friend and I are at her house and she admits to me that she thinks she might be pregnant. I didn't really know what to tell her. Being so young I didn't even know where to begin. A week or 2 more pass and she calls me crying saying that she needs me to come over and help her. My mom drops me off and I head up to her room only to find her curled up in the fetal position in her bed, crying. After she calms down, she tells me that she forced herself to have a miscarriage but punching herself in the stomach repeatedly. She has the fetus in a mouth rinsing sized Dixie cup. It is super small and doesn't really even look like a full baby yet. My stomach is churning at this point. She says she wants help burying it in the backyard. We head outside, dig a hole by the fence and buried the baby. She swore me to secrecy after that. Our relationship soon fell apart and we fell out of touch. This was probably 20+ years ago. Throwaway here. I spend some of my time here on Reddit as an agony aunt of sort. Specifically with people questioning if they are transgender. These people are almost petrified with anxiety and even just reaching out for help, even completely anonymously, is a massive step for them. The vast majority of the people I've chatted with inevitably just fade away. But with a few individuals we've gotten so close we know each other now I roll. In the cases of the ones still questioning, I'm often the only person who they have ever told. Backup account for anonymity. I know a guy that was going to break up with his girlfriend one night after a date. He was dropping her off at home. They walked in to find her dad dead on the floor. So he didn't break it off. 35 years later, they are still married. And that's the story of how I almost never existed. That twist ending. When I was in Vietnam, a fairly popular officer was lost on a ambush. It turned out a few days later he was found by several of his men raping a Vietnamese child and tried. sentenced and executed in the field by his unit. Lots of questions were asked. Not many answers were to be had. Plenty of crazy shit is buried forever in that soil. A good friend of mine, who is now deceased for other reasons, once maimed himself dramatically on purpose. He was desperate for money. He was on the local volunteer fire depot. While working alone with some of the equipment, he managed to mangle several fingers on one hand. The fingers were amputated and everyone believed that it was an accident. Only myself and my husband at the time, now also deceased, knew the truth. He was awarded some money, though I'm not sure how much. The reason he needed money was because his wildlife rehab was very expensive and he hated that he couldn't help more animals. I miss that man. A few years ago, I had an affair. A friend's longtime girlfriend jumped all up in my sheet about it and refused to let me hang out with him anymore. He cut me out of his life. She said I was a bad influence on him and would likely cause him to cheat. Find out years later, she started cheating on him and he doesn't know. A close friend of mine drunkenly confessed to me the details of his first sexual experience. The story went that when he was around the age of 14 and his brother around 13, they would frequently masturbate together. In the grand scheme of things this wouldn't be so weird. But it eventually progressed to jacking each other off. And then to his little brother ducking him in the ass. Supposedly it happened a few times. And each time they both acted like one thing just lead to another. They are both in their mid-20s now and supposedly never act nor legit. Knowing this makes me wonder how many people really do participate in voluntary incest. And are just too ashamed to ever tell anyone. My ex has a friend who is living with her boyfriend now. But just before that was prostituting herself through Craigslist during the relationship without telling him. Not for the money, but because she liked the risk and the validation. She is pretty and bubbly. She gave her boyfriend chlamydia and he never thought twice about it. My once best friend has a secret tryst with her father. She sleeps with him and he provides her with all the utilities, college tuition, and money to spend. Her mother knows that her father was cheating on her and their marriage was ruined because of adultery. Nonetheless, she doesn't know who the real homewrecker is. I know my mom has cancer but she doesn't tell me because she doesn't want me to worry. So I'm saving up to help her with her bucket list. She doesn't know it's so SHHHH. But I heard her say she wanted to go back to Ireland and at some point see the Vatican. I'd love to just pop up in a cafe she's at and take her to get pampered. So now you know my secret. Don't tell mom. A good friend of mine's first sexual experience was with his mom. While his stepfather taunted him that he wasn't a real man unless he came. He was 9 years old at the time. TLDR, my friend is a real methodica. And it's tragic. Fake names used. This story starts in the 1940s. Lena gets engaged to Edward. But her younger sister, Wanda, entices Edward and runs off with him and they get married. A daughter, Tess, is born. But things don't last long for Wanda and Edward and they divorce. Wanda later marries Jim. Tess the daughter reaches the age of 15. And Jim begins raping her. Confused, scared and hurt, Tess tells her mother that Jim, the stepfather, has been raping her. Her mother believes her at first but later goes into a state of denial because life as a single mother in the early 1960s is too hard to bear. In fact, the whole thing is too hard to emotionally deal with, so denial comes into play. Tess feels trapped. And she decides that her only escape is to find someone in high school that will get her pregnant and to send her nightmare. She succeeds. And that's the story of how I was born. It really freaked with my mind for a while when I first learned about it in my early 40s. Late to the party. But my dad was adopted by his uncle and aunt. I never knew about it until I was 19 and my grandmother, my dad's biological aunt, died. After her funeral, my dad sat me down and told me that his real mother had committed suicide and his biological father couldn't handle raising a 5-year-old boy on his own. His bio dad's brother, my grandfather, and his wife couldn't have children. So they decided to raise my dad as their own. I was never allowed to talk about it for fear of hurting my adoptive grandfather. For the 15 years in between the passing of my grandmother and grandfather, we didn't talk about it. A buddy of mine got syphilis from some girl, Jane. In between the time he got it and when he was tested, he hooked up with some other girl that he hooks up with regularly, Kate. After the second hookup, Jane let him know that he might have it, and so he went to get tested and got the medicine to get rid of it, and 2 days later he was syphilis free. Well, after that, he had his weekly hookup with Kate. His story goes, well, I was mid-thrust with Kate and I realized that I had forgotten to let her know that there was a possibility she could have gotten it from me. But that wasn't going to stop me from laying the wood. The next day he went and got tested again, at a different doctor's office, and sure enough, he had gotten it again. This just goes to show that when you find out you have a STD, you must tell everyone that you've had sexual contact with between the time you got it and when you realized you got it. TLDR, my buddy got syphilis from a girl, got rid of it, and gave it to himself again because he's an idiot. My mom had a boyfriend in college who she broke up with. After weeks of him standing outside her apartment building and calling her non-stop, he went to a hotel room and hung himself with rope and a hook on the back of the door. But he was so tall he had to hold his legs up, and my mom found out that he banged his head multiple times during this, as it took him a while to heal himself. His family blamed my mother for everything. But in actuality, the guy was super messed up because his stepmother forced him to have sex with her, starting in his teens, and threatened to tell his father, so he kept it a secret. He also did a lot of drugs. My mom went to his funeral and his family was terrible to her, telling all her friends that it was her fault. Even my dad, who she had gotten back together with briefly, left her and blamed this guy's death on her. My mom is an incredibly caring woman and did everything she could for this guy, but nobody ever found out about his stepmother's abuse. TLDR. Mom's ex killed himself and everyone in my mom's life blamed it on her. My friend came over to my house once in complete crisis. After a couple hours of wailing and random phrases, it becomes apparent that she had given birth to a child a few years back. She alludes to the fact that the child is now dead. A while later she tells me that she used to have a drug problem and had left the kid in the care of a couple of other addicts. When she returned from her run, the kid was dead from heat exhaustion. No charges were pressed, she never was convicted of anything and moved shortly thereafter. I put 2 and 2 together that it's possible she never reported it hid the body. In school there was this girl who was bullied constantly and had no friends. She was a bit of weirdo, she had no social skills, and her mother was even more strange. I was one of the only kids who didn't bully her and the only one to actually talk to her, but I was no hero. I was too scared of the other kids to actually be friends with her. Anyway, one day, when we were about 11 or 12 years old, she sat alone in a classroom, crying after being bullied. I felt bad for her, so I walked in and tried to comfort her. We started talking, and she told me that her father abused her when she was a toddler, and continued doing so until her parents divorced when she was 10. I never told a soul. I wish I had told someone when she told me, or at least encouraged her to tell someone. My coworker has such a bad gambling problem that she routinely runs out of gas on the highway on the way to and from work because she spent it all casinos. 3 times in the last 4 weeks she has accidentally used the corporate credit card to buy gas for her car and is telling payroll she can't pay it back for at least 2 months. I am pretty sure she has lost her apartment as well and is living out of her car. My ex-wife was in an online relationship with a 16-year-old kid she met while playing Call of Duty on Xbox. She led him on to believe that they were a real couple in a relationship. It went so far that they exchanged nude pics of each other. She left me a week after I discovered the relationship, saying that I was too much of an asshole to live with. My family and I know what really happened and are trying to expose her. Possibly the worst thing is that she's an elementary school teacher.